Okay, guys, this is slide 4 of our westward expansion unit, the end of the trail. Let's finish up our discussion about the Native Americans in the West and how the U.S. government screwed them over repeatedly. And let's start with two women that you're going to need to know. The first one is an Indian woman, a Paiute Indian named Sarah Winnemucca. Sarah Winnemucca. And I can promise you, you will need to know her name and how, not how to spell it, but it'll show up in the crossword. So make sure you get the spelling right there. Sarah Winnemucca. Okay. She is an Indian woman, and here is her picture down here on the left. There's Sarah. Sarah Winnemucca personally addressed Congress. She had managed to get herself an education through missionary schools and so forth. And she addresses Congress, speaks to Congress about the abuses to the Native Americans, the promises that are made and then broken, the horrible conditions on the reservations, unemployment, alcoholism, terrible living conditions. And then Congress says, oh, that's horrible, that's terrible, how could we let this happen? We have to fix this. And Sarah goes away, and then they never do anything about fixing it. So, Sarah Winnemucca. The second woman you're going to need to know is a woman named Helen Hunt Jackson. Right? Helen Hunt Jackson. She is a white woman. She's a writer, right? And she writes a book that you see up here in the corner called A Century of Dishonor. A Century of Dishonor. That is basically about the mistreatment of the Indians over the last 100 years, the last century. Right? How their land has been stolen from them, they've been mistreated, the broken promises, the reservation treaties, and the Indian agents, and all of that. And everybody in Congress, the government reads the book, and they say, oh, it's horrible, how can we let this happen? We have to change this, and then nothing ever changes. So, two women who work very hard on behalf of the Indians to change the way they're treated, but nothing really comes of it. Okay? So once we have rounded up all the Indians and sent them to live on reservations, we begin a process called assimilation. Okay? Assimilation basically means to take one culture and absorb it into your culture. Okay? That's the nice, polite definition of it. Assimilation in terms of the Native Americans is basically, how do we make them more white? How do we make Native Americans, how do we make the Indians like white people? Okay? And there are 6 different ways that the government is going to assimilate the Indians, to bring them into white culture. Okay? The first one, now again, all this happens on the reservations. Right? The first one is clothing. We're going to make them wear white clothing. So we get rid of their buckskin clothes, their moccasins, and all of that. And we make them wear civilized clothing, as we called it. Women wore dresses. Men wore suits, shirts, and ties, and so forth. So clothing is number 1. Number 2, cut their hair. We take the Indians' long hair and we cut it short. The women can keep the long hair. But the men, we're going to cut their hair short so that they look like proper American men. Okay? 3, English language. We're going to make them speak English. Right? It becomes illegal. We forbid them from being able to speak their native language. We teach them English and make them speak only English. Okay? 4 and 5 are particularly humiliating here. Number 4, we make them become farmers. Right? Now, I'm not saying it's embarrassing to be a farmer. No, it's a very noble occupation. and you can make a lot of good money. But what we're going to do is you're going to take Indian men, braves, who had fought in battle, fought wars. They had hunted to provide for their families. And you're going to take their gun from them and their knives and their bow and arrow, and you're going to hand them a shovel and a rake and say, "Here, go be a farmer." Right? It's particularly humiliating for an Indian brave to be told that you're going to raise crops, you're going to be a farmer. That had been women's work, if at all, before. Okay? So number 4 is farming. Number 5, and this is probably the most humiliating of them all, we're going to give them American names, English names. Okay? Your name is your identity. It's how you're known to the world. So we're going to take a proud Indian whose name, say, he who kills bear. We're going to say, okay, he who kills bear, your new name is Bob. Right? We're stripping their identity from them, the way they're known to the world, and giving them a new identity, a new persona. Okay? So, English names. Number 5. Number 6, and number 6 gets into this one right down here. We established boarding schools, and they were called Carlisle schools, named after the man who comes up with this idea. Right? But they're boarding schools. Now, a boarding school is contrasted to Trinity. Right? At Trinity, you come in the morning, you get dropped off, or you drive here, and then at the end of the day, you leave, you go home. A boarding school, you don't leave, you live there. Okay? So we established boarding schools, and we named them the Carlisle schools. Okay? They are set up to change Indians, to change Native Americans. And what we learn is that if you want to change a culture, you want to change the way a people think and act, you don't go after the old people because they're set in their ways. You go after the children because they're young and they're influential. Okay? We take Indian children from their parents and we send them to this boarding school where they live with white people. We dress them in white clothes, we make them speak English, we teach them American history. We essentially raise them to be white. So we go after the young in Indian culture. Now, does all this work? Oh, you bet it does. Look at the picture at the bottom right here. This is the same Indian boy, a before and after picture. That's when he lived on the reservation, when he was first taken to, when he lived in his tribe. This is when he's first taken to the reservation. This is after we get done with him on the reservation. After he's lived at the boarding school. He's dressed in white clothing, he's cut his hair, he looks very sophisticated. This is the same kid, the before and the after. Assimilation is a cruel, cruel thing to do to a people. What we do to the Native American people is nothing short of criminal. We not only take their lands, we take their whole culture and tell them you cannot live that way anymore. You must live like us, as if we have the monopoly on the right way to live. Okay? All right. Moving along here. Okay, let's finish up. The ghost dance. Okay? This was a Native American and Indian ceremony that Indians did. There, right under that, you see the picture there of the Native Americans doing the ghost dance. They believed that, especially the old Indians, believed that if they did this ceremonial dance, that their ancestors would come back and the white people would go away, the buffalo would return, their way of life would return, things would go back to the way they were. So they did this dance to honor their ancestors, and they would come back and drive off the white man. Now, basically, it's just to restore some hope to the Indians. But we had just spent years and years and years destroying any hope. We don't want them to have any hope. We're trying to break them, to break their tribe. We don't want them to get any hope. So the U.S. government declares the ghost dance illegal. Well, word gets out that the Sioux are conducting ghost dance ceremonies. Right? The U.S. cavalry comes in to put them down. A bunch of the Sioux flee the reservation. Okay? They are caught up with at a creek named Wounded Knee Creek. Okay? The government catches up, or the cavalry here, the army catches up with the Sioux, and Sitting Bull is among them here. They surround them, they order them to hand over their weapons, and then nobody knows who, but somebody fired a shot. We don't know whether it was on the Army side or the Indian side, but somebody fires a shot, and the U.S. Army opens up on the Sioux. About 300 of them are killed. Okay? The significance of Wounded Knee is that this will be the last battle between the U.S. Army and the Native Americans. This is the last of the Indian Wars at Wounded Knee. Okay? Now the government will implement a new act here, a new government act called the Dawes Severalty Act. It's usually just known as the Dawes Act. Okay? So we'll just call it the Dawes Act here. The Dawes Act is set up to break the unity of the tribe. Okay? It makes it illegal for the tribe to own land. So we introduce the concept of private property on the reservations. Now, to understand why that's a big deal, you got to understand how the Native Americans lived. The Indians had no concept of private property. Everything was owned by the tribe. All the horses, all the teepees, all the weapons, all the cooking implements, everything was owned by the tribe. And everybody in the tribe used it. Right? You didn't own anything. Everybody shared. So it helped build unity. We're trying to break the unity of the tribes. So we go to the reservations and we say, okay, you will no longer live together as a tribe. Instead, you're each going to get a plot of land with a little house on it, if you want to call it that. It was a shack at best. We're going to give you this little piece of land, and this is your shack, and these are your tools. This is your shovel, and this is your rake, and this is your hoe, and these are your seeds, and all that. Now, you live here, and you become a farmer, and you don't mess with the people around you. And then we tell them, I wouldn't trust that guy down the road there, because we gave you some better tools than him, so he's going to come and try to steal your stuff. So we would turn the members of the tribe against each other, so they didn't trust each other. We get very good at this, sadly, destroying these people's lives and their culture and their heritage. Right? So the Dawes Act is set up to break the unity of the tribe through introducing the concept of private property. Okay? All right. Now, again, all this is the Dawes Act is 1887. Okay, and it goes about 50 years of destroying these people's lives till we get to 1934. This is during Franklin Roosevelt here. And the government passes what's called the Indian Reorganization Act. Right? It's sort of a mea culpa, my bad, sorry. It's the government recognizing that what we've done to the Indians is wrong. The Indian Reorganization Act restores their tribal basis. We allow them to, yes, you can live together as a tribe. Your tribe will be a legal entity. The government will deal with the tribe again. We return some of the land that they've lost. Native Americans get citizenship. It's basically the government saying, sorry, we've screwed you over here the last 50 years. Here's a little bit back. We're not going to completely undo all the bad we've done, but it's a start. Okay, so that wraps up the Native American part of our West unit. Now that we have all this land, let's start talking about, in our next slides, what we wanted it for and what we're going to do with it.